In this example, I want to take a look at report writing, specifically within Python. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a week 4 folder. So I'm going to create a new folder under weekly assignments. It'll be a week 4 folder. And in this week 4 folder, I'm going to want to add my Python code. So before I really get started, what I want to do is I want to create a branch for week 4. So I'm going to create a branch called week 4. And then I'm going to get checkout week 4. Okay, and then I'm going to just confirm that I'm on the week 4 branch by going to get status, and you can see that I'm on the week 4 branch. And then I can create files under the week 4 folder. So I want to create a new file under the week 4 folder called csv.py. Okay, so when I'm working with the CSV file, let's actually open up another text file. So I'm just going to say I want a new file, and I'm going to call this file data.csv. So I think most people are aware that CSV stands for comma separated values. So for instance, I might say that my ID is 1, my name is Brian, I live in Verona, I'm 47 years old, and my address is 123 Road. I might do phone number, state of Wisconsin, a zip code of 53593. And then I can kind of repeat that data for various people. Right? And I'm just using GitHub Copilot to fill in some of that data. Okay, so it looks like I have 9 records here with my data.csv. And the idea would be that those 9 records include data like maybe an ID, a name, a city, an age, an address, a phone number, a state, and a zip code. So what I could do with this CSV file is I could label these fields. So I might say ID, name, city, age, street, phone, state, and zip. Okay, so the first row represents the data that follows on the subsequent rows, and the subsequent rows are separated by commas. Okay, where I run into some issues though is what if I said I actually want a calculated field here, which would be the full address. Okay, and that's going to be a combination of the street, the city, the state, the zip code. Okay, so I want the full address being 123 Road, Verona, Wisconsin, 53593. You can see how there's commas in that value, and that's actually going to cause a problem for us. Right, and the idea that I have these commas, I actually do want the commas. I don't know that I need it after the address, but I definitely do need it between the city and the state if I want a valid address. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want the commas here with the full address. In order to allow this CSV file to have commas in between those records, I just want to make sure that everyone's clear that I can have that, but then I have to be a little bit careful with how I do it, in that I have to have that value inside of quotes to say that that's a single value. Okay. The same thing will come up in the file system, so I think you've probably seen it before. If I'm changing a directory, so if I'm on the Windows file system, the Windows file system allows you to have spaces in between your folders or inside your folder names. So like if I was to navigate to my C program files directory, that space causes problems when I'm changing my working directory. So if I use that auto completion feature that's built into the command prompt in Windows, Windows will automatically put quotes around that program files folder to accommodate the spacing. Okay, so there's some stuff that we care about with these CSV files. But essentially, a CSV file is basically a data set, right? So I have data. I represent that data with column names, and then I fill in those values, and they're comma-separated values. Okay, so what I want to do is I actually want to programmatically create a CSV file. Okay, and a CSV file by itself can be imported into other applications. You've probably seen it where you've opened a CSV file in Microsoft Excel or imported it into Google Sheets, or I could run another application which imports that data. So CSV files are used all over the industry. Okay, so I don't necessarily care about this data. What I want to do is I want to be able to generate a CSV file from code. Okay, so the way I want to write this code is I want to have some generic data that I can work with, and then I'm going to do that from a main method. So I'm going to have my main method defined. Okay, so here's my main method, and then I'm going to cancel out of the AI suggestion, and then I'm going to say if underscore underscore name equals main, then go ahead and invoke the main method. Okay, and what I want to do with the main method is I want to open a CSV file. So I want a file handle. So we called it data.csv. So I'm going to say I want a file handle equal to data.csv, and I actually want to open it for write. I actually want to create that file. Okay. And before I start writing to that file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some generic student data. So I'm going to say, go ahead and say, here's students. I'm going to make it a list of students, and I want kind of the same data where I have the first name, last name, age. I actually want additional data. So like I want city, state, zip. Okay, that looks fine. It'll automatically fill in for these other records. Okay. And I'm just going to grab a few more. So I want to grab about 10 records. And I'm just letting GitHub Copilot create that for me. Okay. So that's the data set that I want to work with. Okay, so those are my students. That's the data set that I want to work with. And what I want to do is I want to take that data set and I want to write it to data.csv. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to import a new library, which is the CSV library. And by using that CSV library, I can create a dictionary writer. Okay, and what I'm going to do with that dictionary writer is you can kind of see the GitHub Copilot here is making an AI suggestion, which is I'm going to create a writer, which is a dictionary writer. I'm going to pass it the file that I want to write to, and then I'm also going to tell it the field names, which are going to be the headers. So the field names are actually going to be the headers, and it's saying, hey, you should use the keys from the students list. Go to the first student at index 0 and get the key value. So first, last, age, city, state, zip, those keys, and pass those in as the field names. Okay, so that's what it's suggesting that we do. We can try that, and let's try to write the header. Okay, so let's just try that and see what ends up happening. Okay, so I'm going to change my working directory into the week 4 folder. Okay, and then from the week 4 folder, I'm going to go ahead and run this code. So I'm just going to say I want to run this Python command. And I want week 4. And I'm just going to call this csv.py. And it's important that my working directory is the week 4 folder because inside the week 4 folder is where I have my CSV file. So when I use this relative path to say open data.csv, I'm talking about the relative path of my current working directory. Well, my current working directory from the terminal is the week 4 folder, so my relative path is to that data file that's also in the week 4 folder. Okay, and you'll notice that I get an error. Okay, so when I'm running this, I'm getting this error, no attribute for this dictionary writer. And what's actually happening to me is I was dumb about this naming convention. So I named my file csv.py, and then I also am trying to import CSV, and this file is getting confused about, do I want the standard CSV library that's built into Python, or do I have a circular reference to this csv.py file that's a local file? I don't want that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this csv.py file. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to CSV reporting.py. Okay, and then that's going to change how this ends up running. So I want to do CSV underscore reporting.py. And now you'll notice that I'm not getting an error down in my terminal window, but then I also want to go over to that CSV data, and you'll notice that all I'm doing right now in this CSV data is outputting the header row. And I'll see that, and the reason I'll see that is if I look over at CSV reporting, all I'm doing right now is writing the header row. Okay, and the header row is based on these keys that I have. Okay, the keys, this is kind of confusing. What's actually going on here is what's happening is if you look, it's saying go ahead and grab the first student at index 0. Okay, so student at index 0 is this, right? So if we have students at index 0, it's actually equal to this dictionary, right? And then once we have that, then if we say what is the dot keys, it returns the keys of the dictionary as a list, which happens to be equal to first, last, city, state, zip. Okay, I could have hard-coded that, so I could have came through and said, okay, I actually want this list right here that each record has, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and take that list, and instead of saying the field name is calculated as the keys of the first record, I'm just going to go ahead and plop that in. Okay, so now if I look data.csv, I'm going to empty out and save that, so it's saved. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and run this again. Okay, again, I get no information, but you'll see that I have those same header rows. Okay, so now let's say I want to write the data about my students. Okay, so what I want to do with my data about my students is you'll see it's kind of suggesting I can write the rows. What I would suggest though is I want to loop through my students. So I'm going to say for student in students, I'm going to go ahead and write an individual student row, and then you'll notice it's actually saying, hey, you know what, when you're done doing that, when you've wrote the header and you've also written all the rows, you should go ahead and close that file reference to data.csv. Okay, so now if I run this, let's actually do some printing here. Writing student data.csv file. All right, I can print field names, right? And then I can say print done. All right, so I get some output in my terminal window, so I can see that something's actually happening. So writing data to CSV, field names are equal to these dictionary keys, and then I'm done. And now if I go look at my comma separated list of values, you can see I have that data set output. Okay, so now let's go back. I want to actually handle the fact that my student might have that full address, right? So we looked at how do I create a full address, and we just did that manually before. But now I want to look at like programmatically, how do I do that? I have the data that I need, but then how do I actually write that? So instead of writing the student, I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable called output record. And I'm going to say that's equal to some dictionary. And I'm going to grab the data that I had from the student. But now, so AI put all of that data in there. I'm going to add a new attribute, which is the full address. And you'll notice it's going to give me a formatted string where I'm concatenating the city, the state, and the zip. And I also want the address. Okay, so it didn't give me everything with AI, but it gave me quite a bit. So I want the address as well. I guess I don't have an address. I guess it doesn't necessarily make any difference that I don't have an address. I'll still get that same idea where I have that embedded comma in that record. Okay? And I guess I just wasn't paying attention and I didn't get the address in the actual data set, but I think that should be okay anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the data from my CSV file, and then I go back over to my code, and now I'm going to, instead of writing a row and writing the student, I have this new record that I've created from the student, and that's what I want to output. Okay, in addition, my field names, I have all the field names here, but now I have an additional field name which is going to be the full address. So I'm making sure that those things are in sync. I'm outputting that data for each student, and then I'm also making sure that's in my header. Okay, so now if I go ahead and run this, again it tells me that I'm done, and you'll notice that it actually gave me the wrong output here. So it says I'm writing to the CSV file, it tells me the field names, first name, last name, age, city, state, zip, but it doesn't have the full address there, and then it tells me it's done. If I look at the data.csv file, you'll notice the full address does exist, and it actually handles that full address correctly. You'll notice it puts quotes around it so that it doesn't confuse the fact that there's a column in the actual data, or I'm sorry, a comma in the actual data as opposed to a comma that's meant to be a separator across fields. So it was smart enough to figure out that that should be a quoted value, but I would argue that I'm still not done because my field names don't include the full address. Okay, and the reason for that is because when I was writing it, I was using students.keys, but what I really want to do is I want to use this list that I passed into the field names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, these are my header values. I'm just going to call it my header. And then instead of recreating that list a second time, I'm going to use that variable that I just defined up above, the header. And then when I'm outputting this, the field names, I'm going to go ahead and say it's actually the header. So I use that variable 3 different times. All right, so I create the header, I pass it in when I'm writing out the header, and then I use it to give me a confirmation, like, hey, these are the field names that I'm printing, and then ultimately that's what I'm working with. So now that I've made that change, let's go back through and run it again, and you'll notice that my data.csv file still looks the same, but you'll notice I get a different confirmation down in the terminal window indicating what my field names actually are. Okay. What happens if a student is missing a piece of data? So let's say for the first 2 records, I say I actually want to assign a salary field. Okay, so the first student is making $70K, and the second student's making $80K, and that's it. That's the only students that have that data. Okay, so I say, okay, I actually want that data as part of my header, so I want to keep track of the salary if the students have it. So I output all the information. I'm going to say I want to output the salary, and you'll notice with AI it kind of filled in the blanks here. It said, okay, if you have a student and you have a salary, we're going to use this get function, and I want to get the salary for a given student. If it exists, I'll get the value of the salary. If it doesn't exist, I'm going to go ahead and output n/a. It's not applicable to that student. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clear my data set, and then we can go ahead and run this again. And now you'll notice that the first 2 records have salary data. Okay, so 70,000, 80,000, and the rest of the records have that non-applicable flag set to them because they don't have a salary field. Okay, what if I didn't handle it that way? What if I said, I actually just want to continue on with the way I was accessing the data before, which is to say I want to use a student and I want to ask what the salary is. Okay, and they're giving me an alternative way of pulling up that not applicable. But I'm saying I actually don't want anything there if they don't have the data. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, and you'll notice that it's failing here. And the reason it's failing is because when I ask what the student salary is, when I get to the third record, it's basically saying, and what I mean by that is, here's the first record, here's the second record. When I get to the third record and I try to ask for that dictionary, what is the salary, I'm not getting a value. Okay, there is no value there. So what if I said, I want the salary, so I'll use the .get syntax. I'll say that I want the salary, I'll pass in the salary. But instead of saying NA, I just want it to be an empty string. I don't want there to be a salary at all. I want there to be nothing there. Okay, so just an empty string. Okay, so I come back over to data.csv, and you can see that I crashed after the first two records. So I had already written the header, I'd written the first record, the second record, and then it crashed on the third record. So that gives me some insight into what actually happened. Okay, so if I run this now, though, you can see that I just have an empty value for that last salary field. Okay, with salary being numeric, I probably don't want it to be crisscrossed between a numeric value, which is a salary, and then a non-numeric value. So if they don't have a salary, I'm going to default to 0 if the salary is missing. Okay, I think that's probably the best approach. Okay, so if I go ahead and run this again, now you'll notice that I end up with 0 for the remaining fields. What happens if that happened to be in the middle of my dictionary? So if I said first name, last name, and then salary, as opposed to being at the end of that record? So when I output the record, I actually want the salary to go up above. Right, so I'm keeping them in order. Okay, so I go ahead and run this. Okay, so my data, again, looks like I have that salary mixed in, so I can change the order of these different fields. What happens if, instead of defaulting to 0, I default to an empty string? I just want to see what that looks like. So I go ahead and run it again, and here's my data set now. And you'll notice what ends up happening is I just have an empty value in between those commas. Okay? And that may be okay. So it just depends on what your requirements are for your reporting. Right? So you may have a default value, or you may say, you know what, for this user the salary is not applicable, so we're just going to leave that as an empty field. Or we might have some default value of either not applicable or 0 to indicate that that salary doesn't apply to these students. Okay, so if I'm looking at your week 4 assignment, you're going to basically be creating some reports, some CSV reports. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to set up a few EC2 instances. So you're going to take your script from week 3, where you created a few EC2 instances, and then in that script you terminated those instances. So in this case, I want you to basically create a couple of EC2 instances so you have some data, because that's what we're reporting on. So in our example, we reported on fictitious student data that was AI generated inside of Visual Studio Code. So we said we want some students, and AI generated that code. Well, now we're changing this. So the week 4 activity is asking you to not use the student data set, but to use an actual data set, which is a collection, a list of all your EC2 instances. So in order for this to actually work, you have to set up some EC2 instances. So you'll go back to your week 3 script where you set up some EC2 instances and terminated them, but in this case you're not going to terminate them. You're going to leave your EC2 instances up and running. Okay, and then I'm asking you to create a report of those EC2 instances. So you're going to call the describe instances method using an EC2 client, and you're going to get a data set back. You're going to get a list of all the EC2 instances, and that list of EC2 instances is going to contain dictionary values for each EC2 instance. Okay, so you can imagine we have a variable called EC2 instances, right? And then each of these dictionaries inside of our list is going to be an instance of an EC2 instance, if you will. Right, and we might have 10 EC2 instances. Okay, and then you're going to output a report.csv file with the data from your EC2 instances, and I'm specific about what I'm asking you to grab. So if I scroll down far enough, you can see I'm asking the monitoring state and the instance name. There's a couple of other things that you're going to have. So a public IP address, but the public IP address might not be accessible if you have a stopped instance. Basically, you're going to get your instances, and you have to do that with pagination. So you're not getting all the instances. You're going to page through it, and then you're going to filter it to make sure that you have only the running instances, and then you're going to write that to a CSV file like we just did in our demo. Okay, so effectively you're doing the same CSV work that we did here, except you're doing that against a different data set, which is your EC2 instances. And you're going to get access to your EC2 instances using the script that you had created in the week 3 assignment. Okay, so if I'm happy with that, let's say I am, and I want to stop there, and I'm going to kind of turn things over to you. I just want to make sure that we're always on the same page with, I want to do a git add of everything in the week 4 folder. I'm going to do a git commit. Week 4 started on CSV reporting. Okay, and then I'm going to do a git push origin and week 4. So I push that out to GitHub. Okay, so I make sure that that's out on GitHub. My week 4 branch is out on GitHub, and that's kind of the starting point. And then as I make changes, I'll add other commits, and I'll push again until I'm finally done, and then I'm going to write a commit message saying, hey, I'm done with the week 4 activity. Okay, so I just want you to get in that rhythm of branching and checking out and adding and committing and pushing. Okay, those are very important Git skills. So I always want to make sure that I remind you at the end of each of these demos.